Fire Critical Working Group meeting. So it's going to be about setting the scene, deciding the sort of objectives and the remit that we're going to take upon ourselves. As a number of you here are from BIM for Housing, we've done a lot of work in BIM for Housing on fire critical assets, obviously focused on the residential angle. So we're looking to update those pieces of work, those pieces of guidance, so that it covers right across each sector. That's something we'll be coming on to later. George, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, bear with me. I've just realised I just need to join on my other machine.
Yeah.
I apologise, sorry. I think we've still got people arriving anyway, haven't we? So
yeah, it's fine.
That's my excuse.
Yeah, if you're too long, they'll be leaving.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so we've obviously got quite a lot of people who have been already involved in BIM for Housing, but there's a lot of other people there's new people, because this has been for asset management, so this is a much wider remit.
George, at the moment we're looking at an email message chat. All right, okay.
Okay, right. So what basically we've done with BIM for Housing when we took over about 4 years ago, what we basically did was changed it from BIM being about 3D modeling, which was largely the perceived view of what BIM was, to being about information management, and improved information management. So that's a much wider remit. And we then looked at things across the board, because information is never just within one particular phase of a project. So what we started doing was looking at how we could use information more effectively to, for example, improve the quality of information that goes through from development into construction. So what can development people do to make it easier for the construction teams? And the same with operations. When stuff gets handed over, how can we make it so that information that is received by the operations team is more usable? So we then, and this is the structure that we're using with BIM in asset management as well. We've got working groups that are, if you like, permanent, and the work streams are task and finish exercises. So the task and finish, there's a particular task to do, and let's spend maybe 3 or 4 sessions working on it, come up with an answer, and that then gets published. So what we did with the data group, we looked at standardizing information requirements and also producing data templates that could capture that information. With the process groups, we were looking at classification. So, for example, there's been a lot of work done in terms of assigning things like Uniclass, but we want to make sure that we're putting the right classifications in for asset management, which is a different perspective. Fire safety is by far and away the most active that we've been involved with, and I'll share that some of the examples of that with you in a moment. But that's been very successful, and in fact, we've been feeding that back into the department. They're quite keen to see the latest updates that we've been doing. So any contribution this group would have would actually have some benefits. It goes back into the department, which I think you all understand. That's it's not the politicians, it's actually the civil servants that are acting on these things. We also had a group looking at sustainability, and we helped establish something called Zero, which is, again, its focus is on design and construction. And what I'd like to do is look at doing something for sustainability on that side of things for operations. Sorry, for carbon in operations. And from Monday, we've had a volunteer from Turner and Townsend who's going to lead that activity for us in BIM in asset management. I've not told Richard that, but and also digital records. So the way in which we go about this is that what we find is that we've got in the community a lot of experience, but people work in silos. So the approach that we take, which I think is unique, is that we bring people together either on Teams or in person, and they can be talking to people who are possibly their competitors, but they can also talk to their clients sitting around a table, and they can also talk to people in their supply chain. So therefore, it's probably a unique opportunity for people to share experiences. So, for example, why are you actually doing a fire door inspection if you're not doing it fully? If you're not actually doing a deep dive and possibly taking architraves off to understand how that goes into the wall, what's the point of having a fire door inspection? Also, potentially, what's the point of having a fire door inspection if you've not checked the penetration seals? I don't know if so I don't know if Sharon's on the call, but Sharon from Avesta has been coaching me over the last couple of years to. Is she not? Okay. But anyway, I've been coached by people not to call it fire stopping. So for the record, I'm using the right terminology now. So what we've done is we pull together the groups, and also we led the Golden Thread initiative. So we are from an asset and survey information perspective. So we've been running these, and there, for example, you've got a group of manufacturers all sitting around the table together, and also we've got here a group of designers, again, all talking about things that aren't specifically project related. And then in the far end there, you've got the operations teams. So the point about this, which I think Paul and Stephen that's on at the moment, they would say that what the Teams meetings allow us to do is have that cross-filtering, cross-pollination of ideas, and also the opportunity to question things without worrying that you're going to upset a client by asking them a challenging question. Why are you actually asking me to do this? It may sound a crazy thing, but that's the way in which we're going to get improvement. So that's what I'm hoping to try and achieve with BIM in asset management. What we also try and do is look at things from a point of view of giving real examples. And again, this group, I hope, can help with this. So, for example, this is an example where a fire breaks out in a kitchen, and what measures are in place to actually prevent the smoke from spreading. It might be the compartmentation, and that brings me to the point that I've been educated with over the last 2 or 3 years, and that's that the fire door inspection, the fire doors may be absolutely perfect, but unless the wall and the dampers are also performing properly, what's the point? And then when they get maybe overwhelmed, you need the smoke control system, and you need the detection system. So I think it's a matter of us looking at things as fire specialists, not me, you, and help us understand how the building is working as a system, and then how systems need to work together. So we came up with a way of asking these questions that could really satisfy what the regulator was looking for. And the first thing was, what risks does the asset itself mitigate? So we've done it for 12 asset types, but the questions are common across them. So what does it mitigate? What do people do to an asset to stop it from working? What information do we actually need about the asset to ensure it performs as required? What do we need to know in terms of installation, specification, maintenance? What level of competence is needed? And also, how should those products and how do any changes, how should those be recorded? And we actually produce publications to that effect. And this is what Richard was just referring to earlier. We've had one revision on these already when they were first created in 2021. But the point about it is that what we're doing here is trying to get a common understanding of, for example, you've got a 5-door set, but what are the component parts? And also, what are the risks? What do people do to them? What about the materials that could be affected? But then, what information do we need about specification, construction? And if we can come up with some standardization on these things, it's going to make it a lot easier for us to maybe make sure that things are done to a standard, but also make them auditable. And then these are the asset types. Sorry if that's a bit small, but you can download any of these from the BIM for Housing website. So we've got their fire doors, smoke vents, we've got cavity barriers, fire alarms and detection systems, dry risers and wet risers, emergency lighting, signage, sprinklers, dampers, or fire dampers, dry lining. I know we've got a few people on the call today on dry lining, and smoke dampers and fire penetration seals. So I think that's a really rich set of, if you like, raw information that we now want to work on. And then we also have been looking at things that break the golden thread. So one of them is how do you make sure the right product is installed? That's not just for new build, that's in 10 years' time. Then how do we ensure that the M&E services are actually designed at the right time so that we don't end up with penetration with builders' work holes being in the wrong place? And I noticed yesterday that NG Bailey apparently have now they're now moving directly to work for clients without going through main contractors. So that's quite an interesting change. I need to know a little bit more about that. If anybody knows anything, that would be good to know. How do you make sure that the asset information or the asset is consistent through the life of an asset, which could be 30, 40, 50 years. So when it gets replaced, how do we make sure that's done? And also, as far as the building safety is concerned, the safety case reports, make sure that that gets constantly updated. So we've had over 100 people involved in that. And this was a session we did at Digital Construction Week a couple of weeks ago, where we've actually been through and reviewed things, and that's now feeding back into the process. So that information's constantly being updated. Okay, that's me for now, Richard. Can I hand back to you?
Yeah, absolutely. We had a big meeting on Monday for our BIM monthly forum, which includes any and everyone actually. Now we had some interesting. We've already got 3 work streams, which are the first meeting of one of them is, I think, tomorrow. One looking at the business case, one looking at the digital record, and one looking at interoperability. If any of those 3 interest you, just put a note in the chat and we'll get an invite out to you. They're all meeting over the next week or two. Their first meeting. We've also got set up 3, actually possibly 4 new working groups. There's existing buildings, new build, PFI, and a sort of a side focus group on soft landings, which could be of interest to some of you here.
And fire safety, Richard.
Fire safety.
Fire safety as being this group here.
But I'm just talking about the new ones, aren't I?
Yes, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, we know we're in a working group. I was just telling the ones we added in on Monday.
Okay.
Okay, so if anybody obviously is interested in any of those, put again, existing buildings, new build, PFI, soft landings, just put your name in the chat and say which one you're interested in. Okay, now we've prepared some questions, a little questionnaire. Jess, do you want to put the link for that into the chat?
Yep.
Great. If you would all like to go on the chat and click on that link, then you can input your answers. George, do you want to go through the questions?
Yes, please. Yeah. Just trying to get to it at the moment. Great. Teams is asking me for a poll now.
Do you want Jess to share it?
Please.
Jess, can you share the questionnaire?
Yep.
Okay, so if I could just explain that, can people let us know whether when they're there, when they can see it?
Can anybody not see it?
Can anybody not see it? Yeah. Right, I'll assume that you will be able to. Right. So one of the things I wanted to just understand is in your experience, the buildings that you actually have or are working on, have they had an adequate Regulation 38 pack at handover? So if I can give you a second to just answer that. We've got no responses yet. Is it live, Jess? Has everybody selected something?
No, I have to refresh the page to do.
Okay.
Refresh.
We're just using the Teams. Ah, right. Okay. Is that happening? Has everybody put something in?
You need to fill out the whole form before you'll get answers.
Yep.
Can't submit each
right,
question
okay.
at a time. So.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Can you go to the next one then? Okay, the next one is obviously the purpose of Regulation 38 is that you've got the information. The next question, obviously, is it being kept up to date? So if you're doing fire door inspections or work actually on the project, you should be given access to the fire and emergency file. How many of them are actually being kept up to date? Okay. The third one that we've got there is how familiar are you with the new or relatively new British Standard 8644, which is commonly known as FIRE. If you're not, we're going to get somebody to go through that. Oh, this is coming through live now. This is good. Yeah, so do you understand the difference between the principal designer CDM and a principal contractor Building Safety Act? Okay. Which of your buildings falls under the? Do you know which your buildings fall under the new fire safety regulations? I'm sure you do, but again, I shouldn't prompt it like that, should I, Richard? Here's a little slightly more interesting one. If, for example, in a hospital, if a treatment room with a sink and all that sort of stuff, and the changes to maybe ventilation, if that's being done, do you have to appoint a principal designer and principal contractor? That's one, Jis. We've got, these are questions that we asked on Monday as well. So if there's any overlap with people that were on that, I apologise, but it's a worthwhile thing, because we can give you feedback as to what the I think we had about 70 or 80 people do them on Monday. If you replace a fire critical asset, what level of change management do you have to go through? Do you have to go through the same change management process that you would for construction? I'm talking about during the FM stage. Carry on. Okay, Jess. Yeah. If you've got a fire door inspection, who's actually responsible for determining which doors need to be inspected? Replacing a fire damper, a smoke damper after 10 years, do you have to check the original performance specification? Do you also need the product and spec, the spec of the product that was actually installed and its test evidence? Do you need to know what wall it's going into?
Yeah, that's it, George.
Okay, that's good. Thank you very much for that. It's that's, and if you could let us know. Sorry, go on, Richard. Go on. I'm just going to say, if you could just fill out who you are, that would help as well.
So yeah, if it's possibly worth having a quick chat on a couple of those, isn't it? Because we've got some quite diverse answers. Just, can you throw up a question where there's a lot of yeses and a lot of nos?
Yep.
There's several like that. Right, that's yesterday's, isn't it? Monday's.
No, it's today's.
It's today, is it?
Yeah.
So that's interesting. That 25%. Could you go back up, Jess? So my understanding is that Regulation 38 has been a legal requirement for about 20 years. Paul, would you like to just say something on this? I know it's one of your areas of interest.
Yeah, I will try. George and Richard, you've done a lot of work on this, I believe, because we talked about this a while. But every industry that that I've worked in, when I was in the fire service, we used to get building regulation consultations and requests that the Regulation 38 pack was provided. When I was working with the last housing provider, and even now, people I work with, I've rarely heard of it, and I hardly ever ask for it. They don't know how to ask for it. They don't know what to expect as a template. So I've outlined what should be included in the template. We had a recent update to the Regulation 38 requirements and guidance on that. but generally they don't know where it applies. So it applies to any building where the fire safety order applies. So blocks of flats with communal areas, any building where, open to the public, generally that applies to. So I think there's a lack of knowledge, first of all, that it's required. There's lack of knowledge of what's required within the Regulation 38 pack, as you would call it. There's some great detail in approved document B, tells you what you should expect to see in that. So there's that, but also I think contractors, designers, etc., don't really they're not aware that they should provide it, or they don't make it high on their priority to provide it afterwards. They're happy to complete the build perhaps, and then the Regulation 38 pack is an afterthought if the client requests it. So yeah, that's my experience, and I've probably seen one or two packs in my whole time of doing fire safety, and I've been doing it a long time, to be fair. So yeah, that'd be my comment on it, George.
Thank you. Could anybody else contribute? That the whole idea of these groups, by the way, is not for you just to listen. We're very keen on getting people's views and inputs. Oh, sorry,
Karen.
I've managed estates and fire safety in the NHS for too many years, and I would say from my perspective, I say at the outset, I want my pack handing over, because otherwise I do think the contractors generally know they should be handing it over, but won't offer it unless they ask for it. So I tell them from the outset, you won't be getting paid if you don't get it, because otherwise if they've left site, I won't see it at all. And then I'm trying to manage a building not knowing actually what's been installed.
And what's the impact of that from your perspective, Karen? Because I mean, clearly it's a significant thing, isn't it? But
I have to send my estate staff round to try and find where things are installed, what's installed, things like emergency lights. If we've got a key switch test system, we've got to find out which key switch operates which lights, because we just don't get handed over. And it makes the first month of operation, it can make it really, really difficult. Why I made the decision quite a few years ago that I was telling people from the outset, if you don't hand it over, you won't be getting paid. Because then there was no shock at the end of it when they were saying, oh, we haven't got it prepared, we'll get it prepared and send it, and then I never saw it. So they were told from the outset, so they had time to get it prepared.
Yes.
But I appreciate you've got people who don't know to expect it, and then they're going to really struggle. Once people have left site, you're going to really struggle to get it.
Yeah, what we've been trying. Sorry, I'll come back on that in a minute, Karen.
Richard, do you want to?
Yeah, just coming from the opposite end of experience from Karen, I used to be a regulator for quite some time for a fire service, and the amount of buildings which we saw with, I mean, the word adequate here is the key thing, isn't it? So occasionally we saw kind of people with, say, a whole kind of TAMBA unit full of O&M files, which wasn't adequate in the sense that I remember going to a school, the deputy head teacher was in charge of fire safety, and they had no chance of understanding what was needed to run their school other than to go through all those files. So I think the idea of an adequate Regulation 38 pack is really, it should be kind of what do you need to do to manage and run your building, as Karen mentioned. And it's not really very good if you have to kind of employ somebody extra to that to kind of work that out for you. So it'd be interesting to see what effect the new regulations have, because it should be the client who has to sign something to say they've accepted the information, isn't it, and that it was adequate. And I think the ability for a client to be able to actually understand whether it's adequate or not is questionable as well in the future.
If I could just come back on that, I absolutely agree with Richard. And part of the goal, I think, that we as this group could help with is start to define more clearly what adequate really means. Because in many cases, what I've seen is that there might be a fire strategy document, which is maybe a 60 or 70 page document that is written in such a way that is understandable by a fire engineer, perhaps, but not necessarily understandable by an FM. And the same with drawings. You know, the number of times that I've seen drawings that are really quite complex, and an architect has been trained for many years to be able to read those drawings and pick up from those where you know, what type of wall it is or what type of doors have been fitted. And then they've got to cross-reference those against schedules. And what we're finding is there's much simpler ways of doing that, but somebody's got to do it. But you only do it once. So if you can do that type of thing, it means that right the way down the line, for you know, when other people are being asked to look at things, then you know, that's the work that needs to be done. I think we need a mechanism whereby in BIM for Housing, we went out to 10 housing associations and councils to ask what their Regulation 38 checklists were. And they varied substantially. Now, because of that, I think it makes it very difficult for supply chains to have the clarity of what they get. So what Karen's doing there is really critical. And that's making it very clear to people what it is that they've got to deliver against. It's not adequate to basically say, just read the regulations and make sure that you've complied with that, because it's too high level. The determination of what level of detail, you know, for example, would you in your Regulation 38 pack include door closers? Now, they're an important part of the functioning of a fire door, and the same with ironmongery. But often it doesn't get included. It's in another schedule. That if you know your way around designs and schedules and drawings and BIM models, you might be able to get that information. But for people that are actually operating the building, what we'd like to do is give them much more clarity.
Okay, well, let's just look at another question quickly. Let's look at question 7. Can you put that up, Jess, the results? If you replace a fire critical asset with a different model and manufacturer, does that have to go through the same change process as is defined by the regulator for construction? There we go.
Any observations on that?
So quite a lot of you have said yes. Actually, just over half of you say yes, it does need to go through the same change process. Another significant number say you don't know, and there's, well, one person, we don't know who that is, and we won't mention them, says no.
Well, I think.
Who's right, Karen? Karen,
you're on mute.
Mute. It's my understanding from a building we're going through with at the moment, if we replace the fire critical asset with the same model and manufacturer, we don't have to go through the regulator. But if we replace it with a different model and manufacturer, we do have to go through the regulator.
right, okay. Anybody else got a view on that?
Stephen, what would your view be?
Sorry, I was on mute. Not entirely familiar with the process with the regulator, but my thought process would be yes. It's if it's a safety critical product and you're changing it from what was originally specified and what was selected, then that needs to be considered as a change, and it needs to be reviewed to make sure it's appropriate. But I'm not. We deal with the other end rather than the kind of construction end. So that would just be my opinion on it.
Alistair.
Yeah, from my understanding of the golden thread, that the building safety regulator's involvement with a building doesn't end with post-occupation. There is provision for quinquennial visits and inspections by the building safety regulator during the life of the building. And if they notice that an asset has been changed in comparison to the original specification of the building, then there could be some awkward questions being asked at some point in their next visit. So I think it would, I mean, it's not saying that you couldn't do it, but to avoid any repercussions, then to me and my understanding of the Building Safety Act and its requirements for the golden thread, etc., yeah, you should notify what has been done, because from the previous conversations where people who don't have the full SP on what is in the building, then perhaps the building safety regulator may provide some form of guidance, rather than someone doing their best with the best intentions, going ahead, replacing the asset, and then discovering that the next BSR inspection they've dropped the ball.
Sure. Okay, Martin Oates.
Yeah, hi all. Just to add to that, in our specialist field, of course, of life safety smoke extract products and systems, very often most of the assets for a system are individual assets, but then all, of course, work together to have an overall performing system. So, of course, if you change any asset, it could well change the cause and effect of the entire extract system. So from our perspective, of course, any change to a component within a system, you've got to ensure that that system still is operational in accordance with the cause and effect. So absolutely, it's not just about component changes, it's about component changes within the overall system.
Yeah. Anybody else quickly? Paul.
There's a lot of assumptions made within the discussion on this, like the type of buildings and the type of changes that are going on. So whilst I was at BRE...
Jess, you're still sharing your screen. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But whilst I was at BRE, my office, we had fire door inspections come round and put a load of stickers all over these doors saying they must be kept shut to basically separate us from the corridor. And then I actually pointed out there was a massive piece of wall missing between us and the corridor, and actually the fire doors were doing absolutely nothing because actually it was now redesigned as an open space. So actually replacing that fire critical asset in that location would make no difference because actually it was an open plan office.
Stuart.
So that's my comment on those, that basically the question actually needs a bit more detail.
Okay, fair enough. Stuart.
Hi guys. Yeah, I just think the chap a couple of posts back there mentioned the system, and going on what we said there, it quite often when we look at fire dampers in walls and we talk about the penetration seals, etc., it can all get let down over something as simple as a data cable being brought in, and then you have a penetration through the compartment wall. So it has to operate as a system. More often than not, we see a lot more understanding of fire doors and how they should and shouldn't. And when we come in, and the maintenance program seems to be really a lot better than it would be for the fire dampers, because we have guys coming in, they test the fire damper quite literally just to see if it functions, and they're unaware of if it's the correct damper in the correct wall pack. They're not even understanding fire strategies. So where we see one component completely lets everything down, and I think that's where it all needs to come together, to be honest with you, because we see it in everything. We see the latest and greatest test with some fire products where we have the crush sleeves, etc. I see a lot of crush sleeves going through the vertical walls where you can operate on plastic and it crushes. Then I see this same item being used in in a riser, in a plastic crush sleeve in a riser that can have the drip effect. So it's throughout the building. I mean, if we really looked at a building critically, you know, you'd probably close about 99% of them. It's really that bad out there at the moment, and you bring it to the forefront. And like you said, Regulation 38 and all the documents that these guys are only just beginning to try to understand. The problem is with that is once they've got their pack and they present it, they're not really sure what's in the pack, let alone what's actually the physical side of it on site. You know, so I think as a system, I think that's the most important word today will be system. It has to work, otherwise it's flawed. It's like an MOT on a motor vehicle.
Absolutely. Karen.
We're going through this process at the moment. Obviously, I look after a large hospital, and we've been told we have to go through the building safety process for changing doors and repairs to compartmentation. Now, that's by somebody who is supposedly qualified to advise us on the building safety procedures. If I've got to go through that every time I replace a fire door, we will not be able to maintain our hospital, full stop. Because at the moment it's taking between 22 and 30 weeks to get something through. If somebody's rammed a door off with a tug, or I've got to replace the door because it's safer to replace the door, but we're being told now we've got to go through for approval.
Karen,
which is just mad.
Yeah, Karen, that's very much what we're trying to do with this group and the rest of the BIM in asset management group. The reason for that is that over the last 3 or 4 years, I've spoken to dozens, hundreds of subject matter experts on fire doors. Yeah. And if you ask them what their interpretation of the law is and what's got to be done, you'll get several different interpretations. And these are not people that are not qualified or not experienced. They're very experienced, but they're only experienced based on their experience, if that makes sense. So what I think we've got to do is provide a means by which people can talk, and you can ask in a community environment, what about this? How should we do this? I mean, we had it on Monday where
George, why don't you segue smoothly into answering the question, why BIM in AM? Why are we here?
Okay. Yes,
because
okay.
that follows really quite nicely, doesn't it, with what you're actually saying now?
It does. Has anybody else got anything to ask though, just before I commandeer the
Yeah, just stop sharing now, please. Cheers.
Okay. I'm do a couple of things. One is right. I'm sorry, Richard. You caught me.
Sorry, I didn't mean
for
to
that.
catch you out. I thought it just seemed to make sense to follow on from where you were going.
Yes. Okay. Bear with me a second. I'm almost there.
Brilliant.
Okay, so obviously we understand that we need to create structured digital information, and the reasons for that are to try and make sure things are properly checkable and auditable, because it may well be, and I'm going to give you an example in a minute of an audit that we've been involved with over this last few months. But obviously, there's a range of different things. There's the Building Safety Act, there's the Fire Safety Act, there's also the Defective Premises Act, and there's new legislation, obviously, on ESG as well. So, people like Karen are inundated with requirements for compliance, and it's not at all easy. As far as there's then the threats of delays, as Karen was just saying there, at the different stages. But I think it's quite telling, and one of the reasons for BIM in asset management is that there's a huge amount of investment gone in over the years into the design and construction process in terms of providing classification, standardization, processes, software tools to make all of that easy. But the part, if you like, the majority of the life of the building, there's much less work gone in, much less investment gone in from the industry. So therefore, software companies like ours, we're not getting a lot of guidance from people as to how to make their information interoperable. So we're having to get on and do it. But the point is that that's the area that is probably the greatest need, because it's the bit that is often assumed just to be, well, I've heard it said caretakers, and the examples that people tend to use in the construction industry. They say, well, yeah, when what FM's about is changing light bulbs. Yeah, and that irritates me hugely, because they're just not appreciating why it's important to do this. So we need to make sure that during those later stages that we've got the information. I think the starting point, as Karen was saying earlier, is the Regulation 38. And in principle, what obviously people are now legally required to do, arguably they should always have done it, is to design in line with building regs and also select products that satisfy the specifications and record what was installed, and also record when things have been changed. And all too often people say it will be in the BIM model, or it will be in the O&M, or because it's been through building control, we assume that Regulation 38, all the Regulation 38 stuff, will have been carried out or would have been checked. And of course, that isn't the duty now of building control. It hasn't been for many years. So that's what we're trying to address. Now, I've heard it said that data is the new oil. And certainly we're getting a hell of a lot of data. But I've actually checked, and the person that actually came up with that was a British mathematician. And what he actually said was something quite different. And that is that oil, if it's unrefined, can't really be used. So what we need to do is understand what information people need, why do they need it, what happens if they don't have it, and as far as clients are concerned, also, do they understand the information, the value that people are delivering? And that comes to something that Paul Oakley was just talking about earlier, which is the purposes to which things are being done. So if I just give you an example, this is work that we did probably 4 or 5 years ago with a big housing association on a new project. And we produced a set of asset lists that they said, their FM team said they needed, in terms of to satisfy their requirements under the building safety. And what we actually found was that there's no mention of cavity barriers in there, no mention of penetration seals, or even fire dampers. And that then went into a bigger piece of work that we did with the Housing Association Charitable Trust. And this is now the standard that is to some extent being used for lots of housing associations. And again, it's fairly incomplete. And we're finding that, you know, the way people are communicating on these sorts of things is probably on LinkedIn. So this is one that I came up with, I saw last week, where somebody was testing, doing a test of a riser system, and the valve failed and ended up with flooding, but they were able to sort things out. And so these sorts of conversations are going on LinkedIn, but they're not being captured. So what we're trying to do with BIM in asset management is provide an environment where some of those experiences can be gathered. And as was said earlier, there's now a legal requirement for clients to understand and verify and state that they understand that they've received the information that they need to operate the building. And also, there's now a legal requirement for the construction team to actually deliver all that information. And so what we've done is looked at Regulation 38 and identified the things that actually are mentioned in it. And the challenge is here that you've got some things there that are asset type and some that are systems. And therefore, you know, for example, the verification of whether you've got all the information that you need for that smoke control system, for example, that needs to be broken out. Otherwise, you can't really check to see that you've got it. It might be that you've got a document that covers it. So what we're trying to do here is look at how we can get information in a way that is auditable. So, for example, you might have a data sheet for for fire doors, but the way they're describing fire rating, for example, is quite different. And you know, people have said, well, AI will sort all that out, but actually, do you really want to rely on something that is trying to read something that is just described as a color? We need some sort of more standardization on that. And then finally, I'll just show you an example that we've been working on with a housing association. So this is what they received on this particular project. So basically a link to a PDF, a website with PDF documents. That's the project. When we actually opened up just a couple of the documents, we found that actually they're unusable. Yeah. And it's only because the way in which that was saved was somebody had zoomed out so that it would fit properly. But all of that fire stopping information, you can't read it because you don't know what the tags are. And when we actually raised that with the employer's agent that was responsible for actually delivering this, they said, well, we don't look at things, we don't read them. Our responsibility is just to make sure that the file has been provided. Which, I don't know what you think about that. I was shocked. And what we then did was went through and identified what was missing. So you see there's a lot of greens on there because those are the things that were at the early building control level. But then when we then drilled into some more detail, this is identifying what was missing. And when we get further down, that was the Regulation 38 situation. So because we're trying to do this in a more methodical way of saying this is managed in you know, that we can actually say we need product literature for that particular type of product. Has it been delivered? Also, it may be that you've got a drawing and some schedules, but then how do you then relate those things together? So this can be quite complex to look at door schedules, for example, which architects will be able to manage that very easily. That's what they do. But you'd need to be, if you're an FM, would you have the time or the ability to have that if that information has been provided? Because often it hasn't. And then if we can then use BIM to pull this together, so we can actually see the both the specification of the door and also where it is and what documentation is needed against it. So in this case, maybe an AOV or something like that. You've then got the ability to overlay those things so you can actually see them all in context. So that's the sort of thing I think that we need to make sure we're actually delivering against. And finally, this is another example of that, where the information is then brought together. So you've got the spatial, you've got a model. You can see where the fire compartments are, the 60 or the 120-minute fire compartments, but also see the assets that are protecting it. So I think that's a way of managing that from an auditable point of view. So what I'm saying is that if we can channel the experience of this group to say what information actually is useful and what do we need, then we've got the opportunity as more collective to feed back up to supply chains and say this is the requirements, without people then adding cost because you're asking them for things that are unreasonable. Any thoughts on that? Stunned silence.
Is that a worthwhile aim? Is that what we should be doing? Is it a good idea? Is it worth your time? Ben Evans.
Hello.
Hi there.
Yes.
What do you think?
So actually this is quite timely because I'm in a IPA working group, which is PFI centric. So we've got a fourth session tomorrow afternoon on fire safety.
Okay.
Where we're looking at scoping asset condition and maintenance of fire safety in PFI buildings across all asset classes. But we have found it quite hard to get going, and we have industry experts as well inputting into the sessions, but we're still trying to, it's quite a as we know, it's quite a confusing subject, particularly with the new regulations as well, as to how they all knit together or not. I know, just extending on to what Karen was saying about the fire doors at Leeds Hospital, NHS estates have brought out a new HTM guidance or replacement guidance on fire risk assessments, and they have actually brought fire door inspections to the fore. And it's quite a lengthy document, but I haven't gone through it, or we haven't gone through it yet. But does that kind of conflict with Reg 38 in terms of fire risk assessments using the ALARP principle? As low as reasonably practical assessment. Linguistically, does that chime with Regulation 38 and the specific legal requirements? So it's all those sort of industry documentation guidance. Does it always knit together? I don't think it does currently, but it may do in the future.
Okay, cool. Cliff, you had your hand up earlier and you put it down. Have you got a view here?
No, it was more to do with the earlier topic about Regulation 38. Just to say that I've been in the industry for about 40 years, my father for about 70 years, and neither of us had heard of Regulation 38. So he's an architect and now a clerk of works. I'm an information manager, and yeah, never heard of it. So it's good that it's been brought to the surface.
Extraordinary, though, isn't it? Actually, to think about that.
Yeah, he's been a lead architect on shopping centres and airports and things, and he's very sought after, but also housing as well. He's now a clerk of works for social housing companies in London. Never heard of it before.
Well, Regulation 38 isn't just about housing, is it, Paul?
No, it's not. It's that's what I said. It applies to any building where the fire safety order applies. So it will be offices, shops, anything where you have to carry out a fire risk assessment, basically. So yeah, and that's the bit that people seem to miss. So well,
it is extraordinary, I think.
Yeah, and it's been frustrating.
Well, while we're talking about not really understanding or knowing about things, Fiery, George, you I mean, you put the question on the poll about Fiery and how familiar people were with that. The vast majority of respondents on this meeting had less than 50% knowledge.
Okay, well, I'm not surprised, but it is now a British standard. So I believe you are supposed to be, or people are supposed to be complying with it. Paul Oakley is leading our interoperability group within BIM in asset management. Paul, could you just give us a quick explanation of what Fiery is?
Yeah, I'll just share my screen and then we can. And then...
Brilliant.
Okay, you can see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, so BS 8641-1 in 2022, Digital Management of Fire Safety Information set out the requirements of an information exchange identified as Fiery. Okay, so they took on the COBE schema, Construction Operations Building Information Exchange, and basically rebranded it and changed things under the heading of Fiery as a way of exchanging information. But they missed out the basics that COBE has software that can write it and other software that can read it. So for an information exchange, it's a schema, but you need solutions that can both write it and read it. And it's unlikely that you're going to get any software that's going to hold the information that they've identified within Fiery and put it out that way. Myself and a series of other information management people put out this to BIM Plus. I'll put in the chat, which basically an article that went through a lot of the issues with it. Now, the principles of what they're trying to establish is good because they're trying to basically standardize the data relating to fire. But the way they've gone about it is a very bad implementation of it. And within the standards, sorry, those who understand standards, there's normative and informative parts. So the normatives are you shall comply with this. So the way some of the Fiery was put across was that it is a shall, but then within some guidance and other things they put out afterwards, they retracted that and said it's reference information about how you could go about doing it, which obviously leaves a big issue for industry. So you've got certain people saying you need to provide Fiery, but actually Fiery doesn't work itself. With I was at BRE, worked with ActivePlan defining the templator solution that we tried to use with CPA for Lexicon. So this is sort of a template where I've gone through, taken each of the properties identified within FIRE. So FIRE sets out all these different sets of properties and tried to and put them in groups. Now, again, some of the issues with certain things are fine because certain things are, say, aimed at space heating for mechanical. Some of them are associated with actual spaces. But a lot of the things are very generic. So there is no identified asset types that the properties can be associated with. And then other ones which are more, actually, if I just go into the form view, I mean, so some of them do. So again, there's a protection method which relates to options of pipe collar, concrete, spending. So that there's or resistance finishes. So there's enumerated values that could be associated with stuff, or egress, which really is going to be related to things like doors and that. But they haven't actually, the way they've grouped these, they haven't said that this information should be associated with doors. This needs to be associated with ceilings or electrical elements or things like this. So out of the article that was put in, they're supposed to have gone back, looked at all these requirements and re-delivered it. This was August 22 when we raised all these issues. Nothing has been published. We know the people who are involved, they moved on in their jobs and moved to other places and that. And I've tried to query it with BSI, and at the moment they're not aware of what is happening on this space. So it's an area that really needs a lot of clarification to be resolved.
So are you saying that FIRE is now compulsory to follow?
It was identified in a British standard in normative clauses.
But you're saying it's not fit for purpose?
Correct.
Wow.
I think if you interrogate a number of the British standards, they're not brilliant. There's hundreds of them. But I think the point is, from this, Paul, what can we do to take advantage of that process of having things that are machine readable and auditable? The whole point about this for the community is so that we can make it easier for manufacturers of products to, for example, provide the information that they need to provide about the products that are being installed, and also for fabricators and also contractors to do that as well. So this is something that is available if we want to look at it, or if we want to do it. And Paul's interoperability group, which I think Newman from Mighty is also involved in that. He's the head of asset management for strategic asset management for Mighty. So he's engaged in this. So if we could determine, because it may well be that these attributes here are very useful from a design perspective, but we don't need them for asset management. But we might need different information for asset management. So this information is, if you can tell us what, or if you can tell Paul what information you actually need to know about a cavity barrier or a smoke damper, then it may well be that could get fed in.
Well, we're also going through the list of attributes that they've defined with particularly enumerated values and say, actually, this should be applied to these types of objects.
Yes.
Because, Now, what should be understood is that things like COBE, IFC, and lots of other things have ways of carrying attributes and groups of attributes. So all the fire information could be provided using COBE or IFC or lots of other open data standards. So it doesn't need another open data standard to deliver the information. That can be done using existing schemas. But clarity over what properties needs to be associated with what type of objects, that is the key thing.
Exactly. And if we can therefore make it so that the manufacturers, the fabricators, the installers, the maintainers, the operators have got a clear definition, standardized definition of what information is required, it would help enormously, I think, because it's taking away the need for just relying on opinions. Stuart, you're on mute, Stuart.
Yeah, it's a massive ask, though, isn't it? From design stage right down to installation and everyone in between, to have a central focus point where you can go. You often find a lot of the problem I see in my particular industry is if it's reached that point where we've got, for instance, we might have a 2-hour wall which is passed, and we might have a 2-hour fire damper that is but when they're put together, they're not compliant. It's the wrong damper for the wrong wall. Now, if it gets to that point of installation, what I'm seeing in an awful, unwittingly, I've done a case study over 30 years of assessing and going through National Occupational Standard qualifications. So I'm out there in the field every day, in hospitals, in nuclear facilities, and coffee shops. But what you see is if it's getting to that point, how has it been specified? Who designed the system? It's a huge task to get right throughout it all. And then the last safety net that we actually have is, do the guys understand? The installers, the guys at the coalface, are they qualified to make these decisions? And I think that we're still struggling now. 20 years ago there was qualifications, and now I know it's not just about that, and now we're still struggling with, we've got operatives on site who aren't qualified to do the job. And this is all passive fire, whether they're involved in fire stopping, whether they're involved in ventilation, fire dampers, or whether they're involved in fitting fire doors. We're still seeing companies not coming to the table to make sure that their operatives are qualified. So asking them to understand a lot of this information needs to be taught, to be honest.
Most definitely. I mean, we are actually trying to help with that. So if I just show you, we've had a team. I mean, everybody on this, we're all volunteers. We're all volunteering our time. Yeah. So what we want to try and do, we're not setting this up just to have another working group or another body. I'm not aware of anybody that's actually doing what you've just described there, and that's looking at across the piece. But this is an example. We built on something that was developed for the NHS, which is a standardized way of doing fire door inspections. And we picked this up, and it goes through the process, and it identifies 3 types of fire door inspection. One is of a brand new door, another is of an existing door to understand what it is, and the third is then the ongoing fire door inspections.
I think having this in place is great. I've come away from a huge hospital project recently where the only reason the fire door was exposed for a fault was the fire door and the frame were perfect. Nothing wrong with that, all the hardware. And it wasn't until you got to the header that it was attached to an MDF architrave that was sat around the door, and it wasn't screwed in any way. The header was screwed to it. The actual architrave was used with a spit gun, so it was just a nail gun put the architrave in place. And of course, because of the resistance on the door, when you opened it, the architrave come off, and subsequently this door could open and close at will, and it was blowing open and closed. And it wasn't until the NHS consultant at this brand spanking new hospital looked at it and he said, "Wow, we've got a problem." Now they've got to go around and check every single closure. They've got to check whether or not, because once it's painted, it's difficult to unearth those problems, unless you have a full frame with the architrave, etc., on that you can see how it's fitted. But more often than not, a bit of paint and decorating don't have cause problems if you don't know what you're looking for.
So exactly. So the point about this is something that was originally created for the NHS. I don't know if you've seen it, Karen, but I can, yeah. And they're currently doing one for dampers and ventilation systems as well, which we're also robbing.
Who's doing that for the dampers and ventilation?
It's the National Association of it's the Health Services, NAFO, is it?
NAFO, National Association of Healthcare Fire Officers.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so what we're doing here, with their permission, by the way, it's Alan Oliver that runs that with it, for the NHS. We've taken it and we've run this through the Bin for Housing community, and a lot of people have put quite a lot of effort into this. So we've now got this as a new publication, and it's doing exactly what Stuart was just saying there. It's giving explicit examples and training for people on what to look for.
Brilliant.
And that this is the sort of thing that we now want to broaden and do that exactly the same way for all those other fire safety critical assets.
I think it's great. I think for CPD, etc., and the rest of it. But what I'm seeing a lot of is guys who actually sit very short 2-day courses, a maximum of 16 hours, CPD, and then some of these, and again with some of the associations in my field, I've got 4 associations that got 4 different ideas who all run 4 different 2-day courses, and at the end of it, they're telling people they can go out and check these assets. You will have an onslaught of chippies and checking installations, and really that's what we've got to be careful of, because I see it in ventilation where a guy will literally let off a fire damper, reset it, that's the job done. And it's very similar to me putting the kettle on and turning the kettle off. I wouldn't call myself an electrician, just because I can turn a kettle on and off. But these guys are giving out certificates, and the certificates that they give you, they look all glamorous. And then they will walk up to a facilities manager or an estates manager at a hospital, present it and say, "We've tested your fire dampers." And they will walk away. Those fire dampers that I go to visit through third-party accreditation aren't nowhere near compliant. They're dangerous. They're putting people's lives at risk. And a lot of the time we get the wrong damper in the wrong facility. I still see non-actuated dampers in hospital facilities. And exactly where Karen was going, it's a very complex decision to make. If you've got a damper that's been installed 20, 30 years ago, and if we want to replace it, we can't replace it for like, because regulations have changed. How many times has the Building Act changed since 1984? And then we have, with 2010, the latest Building Act Building Safety Act that we go back now, Regulation 11F. the biggest thing in the Building Safety Act that's changed for me is compliance and competence. How do we measure it? So unless we get that right, we're going to have people will just have a lot more paperwork and they won't understand it, and they'll just be tick boxing.
Karen.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I wrote my master's degree in fire doors, and I'm astounded at some of what are supposedly third-party accredited repairs that we've got on some of our doors. And I look after more than one trust. It's just beyond appalling. And they're paying through the nose for it because they're saying they're third-party accredited. And the issues I've identified recently, I am going to go back to the accreditation body, because if that's been done through third-party accreditation, it's not even worth paying for.
You're right, Karen, because the problem is what we have when we look at the third, and I won't go off too much, but when we look at the third-party accreditation, we have to be careful because we have the facilities that can measure and test products in-house, like we have, you know, Bree, etc., Warrington Fire, and the rest of them. I get that. But when you have a third party that comes to the table and then they come into the NHS and they present themselves as a genuine third party, I don't know any I know one third party, but the majority of third party, they will come in and they would look at your policies and procedures. They only know how to work with policies and procedures, and they've got the totally wrong ISOs in place to come onto a site and look at a fire door or to come and look at a fire damper. The threat isn't policies and procedures, although it's very important, the paperwork that sits behind it. The physical threat now for me is on site is the installation. And if we can see by, look what we've created for the past 30 years with the historical problems. I thought we'd have a line in the sand with the Building Safety Act and the Building Safety Regulator coming to, you know, to this point, especially after the tragedy at Grenfell. But it seems that what I feel has been created is now there's a whole new market for people to go, oh, compliance and competency and the rest of it, but they're not compliant and competent themselves, but they're just calling themselves this because it's a business opportunity.
Absolutely. Karen.
The third party accredited body that I've got the issue, well, I've got the issue with the company who's supposedly doing it to that standard, is a recognised body. It's a recognised body that you spend a fortune to get part of, and you get lots of testing and checks to make sure you're compliant. And
is it? Karen, you need to ask them for a declaration of compliance to begin with. So you'll want to know what if they've got National Occupational Standard qualifications in place, and if they're time served operatives, brilliant. But the majority of the time, what you'll find quite quickly is that I know certain four associations, and unfortunately we have to work through them because they're government. One of them works through the government, and the problem you're seeing quite quickly is I can go and sit a 2-day course next week and not be industry at all, and I can walk away from it, and I can come into your hospital and I can set your fire dampers on and off and put your people at risk. And it's the same with vent hygiene, especially with grease extract cleans and the rest of it. Someone can walk into a hospital or into a shopping mall and say that they're the expert to do that, and it's everybody. It's putting so many people at risk, and this is why we have 900 fires a year.
I just want to bring in, we're very short of time. I just want to bring in Alistair.
Sorry.
No.
Yeah. I've been listening over the last few conversations, and whilst it's probably not going to solve things overnight, I would like to think that the coming future it's going to try and ease things, the concern about competency, training, etc. The competency steering group is obviously, they've got their 12 working groups looking to provide competency matrices for the relevant stakeholders within the passive fire protection industry. And hopefully this will then start narrowing down and defining what is required of these people. With regards to, in my own field, passive fire protection, working group 12 of the competency steering group is working on fire stop installers or passive fire protection installers. And whilst that's a kind of general competency matrix. The ASFP are actually have a couple of working groups that are looking to narrow this down to a list of, yes, whilst these are the general requirements, the ASFP are actually trying to define specifics so that a person doing the installation of Firestop will be expected to have this level of knowledge, this level of understanding, this level of experience, and this level of behaviour. There is also a working group for passive fire protection designers. And again, the ASFP are trying to narrow this down in terms of this is what is expected for these people, what is expected of these people. So with regards to these competency steering groups, the working groups, working group 12, which is for Firestop, passive fire protection, the plan for that is to have it actually as a British standard by early 2025. Other groups are expected to kind of follow with regard to this. It covers things like fire engineers, architects, installers, inspectors. So there's a working group for each one.
Alistair, I agree with you, but
yeah,
Pete, Stuart, very, very briefly.
Sorry, just to say that the ASFP, you know, they failed to recognise the National Occupational Standard qualification. It's already there for fire stopping.
I accept
that. That should be, that's a robust, that's a government requirement for the minimal technical competence that we need to perform a task on site. So moving away from the government legislation, ASFP being another association with paying members who are sat actually on working group 12 really doesn't give me confidence that we're going to get the outcome we require. E-learning is all that seems to be the rage at the moment. We have to look at the guys at the coalface doing the job.
Stuart.
I agree.
George?
I was just going to say, what we've now got, we've got the work streams, and what I'm hearing here, we've got a number of different things that we've got going on. We've got the business case work stream, which is, I think, the driver for a lot of this stuff, because we can actually say, this is the reason we actually need this to be done in a more rigorous way. I think that's what you're saying, Stuart. We've also got the digital record work stream, which is looking at what type of evidence is needed and how the best way of delivering that for people at the coalface. And the third one is the one that Paul's running, which is the technical one, the interoperability one. And that may not seem so relevant to you, but the easier that it can be when somebody's doing something for their purpose, for that to update other systems becomes really quite important. So if we can use that to define what our information requirements are, particularly from the asset management end of fire critical assets, then, you know, what are the fire critical assets that you actually want information on? I'm sure that collectively we could pull that together. If so, would you mind putting in the chat whether you're interested in any of those work streams that Richard was talking about earlier? Well, you can do that off the website as well, can't you, Richard?
You can do it on the website. Yeah, absolutely. On our website, it gives you details of all the working groups, all the work streams, when their next meeting is, and to request an invitation for a meeting. So it's all there. Or just bung us an email, obviously.
For the people that haven't yet spoken on this, because obviously people are coming on to learn, do you feel what we're doing is actually worthwhile? Because we're all volunteers. I'm a volunteer. I'm trying to fit this in around my working day. Do you think that what we're doing here is worthwhile?
Yeah,
if you
100%.
do,
sorry to jump in.
Yeah.
Having somewhere where it's all uniformed and a standardized approach would be, that's your golden standard for everything. There's so many times that we get clients come to us and they're in need of information, but the information they find on the internet, you can find something to fit your narrative, no matter what you want to be your agreed principles. You could find something on the internet to agree with that, and then you can like that. We always get get them handed to us and say, no, this is what the internet says. So in order for your website as such to be a hub of that kind of information, an agreed standard information source would be fantastic.
Yeah, the other thank you very much, and certainly that's what we want to try and do. The other thing is the what we've found on the BIM for Housing work is that people that wouldn't normally talk to each other or have the opportunity to talk to each other actually become colleagues, and they can ask each other questions.
Yeah.
So it becomes a real community where people who Stuart, for example, his frustrations, who do you talk to about that, Stuart? It's difficult for other people who aren't doing what you're doing to understand it, whereas it's really, really important. And I think
the amount of differing opinions and information you get when you speak up, it gives the opportunity of you to be shot down so quickly, very easy. So yeah, putting everyone in and forcing this to happen is a fantastic idea.
Yeah. Also, if we can identify based on experience, I don't know, Holly, if you're still there at the moment, but Holly's a fire engineer, and some of the examples that we really want to do is capture experiences to say this, like that one I showed you earlier with fire breaking out in a kitchen. We could do with a dozen or so, probably more, examples of scenarios that then enable you to look at system thinking.
Yeah, definitely. I've been a firefighter for 20 years, so I've seen systems in place that work and systems in place that definitely do not. And yeah, it's to have that kind of information at a click would be your golden standard.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we've run over a bit. I'm sorry about that. You will receive an email sometime next week with the high point notes of this meeting and a video link should you wish to watch yourself again. We won't be having another meeting now until September, obviously, but we will be in touch on that and other things. Presumably, if you're interested in joining any of those working groups, put it in the chat. Failing that, we'll see you after the summer.
But could you also communicate this with other people, because we want this to become, if you like, a movement, a wider community. So if you know people that would be interested in this, then please ask them to engage with us.
Absolutely. Spread the word.
Assuming you think what we're doing is okay.
Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.